What's up, everyone? Josh White from the HeroFront podcast coming at you with a special bonus episode given the holiday, talking about Memorial Day, where we take time to think about the veterans that came before us. I was honored to have spoken with Mrs. Linda Ambard, who I knew at Whiteman Air Force Base, and she had this incredible story. Since I started this podcast, I reached back out to her. She's at Kadena Air Force Base now, and we got to talk all about her incredible husband, Major Phil Ambard, who just lived an amazing life. He was a patriot through and through, and he was tragically killed by someone he trusted and confided in while stationed in the Middle East. It's in every sense of the word tragic. The one silver lining is that Linda Ambard took the values that she learned and admired about her husband and directly lived her life that way. She started running marathons in his honor, wearing American flag, and she was there that fateful day during the Boston bombing. At that point, she said enough is enough, and she would not let terrorism win anymore. She started fighting back, and her voice was heard by thousands. Linda is helping people to this day. She was able to work hand in hand with General Goldfein, and with him, reworked how mortuary affairs and spouse benefits work when they lose a loved one. They took her story, they heard her feedback, and they made it much, much better. So I come to you today humbled to talk about and honor Major Phil Ambard and to hear his incredible story through his widow, Miss Linda Ambard. Let's get after it.
We lived all over the world. We moved every 2 to 4 years. And you get used to the hellos and goodbyes, not getting attached to jobs, not getting attached to people, not getting attached to houses. And my job was to be the positive spin master in our house and be the super glue that held everybody together. The one that helped smooth that transition for the children. And since Phil was gone half of our marriage, and we were married 26 years, my job was basically the stability of the family. And I was more than okay with that. But there were periods of time during that time when sure, there was loneliness. Sure, I wanted to go back to my professional life, my career. But I knew that I got one chance to be a parent, no do-overs. And so I chose to stay at home, other than teaching swimming lessons and running swimming pools in the summertime. And I was thrilled to watch him fly because he was so humble. He never did things for awards, and sure, he won a boatload of awards. That wasn't his motivation. His motivation was longevity in the military, giving something back to the country that he loved more than anything. And it was his identity. He always said, I am the flag, I am the flag. And
oh, wow, I've never even heard that said that way. That's kind of beautiful.
It is, because when you consider he joined the military as a slick sleeve, he had no stripes, no nothing. He joined to get his American citizenship. And he spent 26 years in the military, 16 enlisted, 10 as an officer. He had a line number for senior master sergeant when he got his commission. And what happened was, in that first 4 years, he kept talking about, I'm going to get out, I'm going to get out, I'm going to get out and go to school, I'm going to get out and go to school. And about the end of his 4-year mark, he said, no, I'm not. You know, I love this. This is more about, he said, Americans lose sight of their freedoms and opportunities given to them by their American citizenship, by birth. And he loves standing for something more. When you grow up in Venezuela, the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and there's no in between. If you don't have the right political ideations, you are persecuted. It impacts your living style. It impacts your job opportunities. It can actually lead to violence against you. And what he learned in those 4 years is why he started to say, I am the flag, I am the flag, because he knew that the flag represented all the people like him that stood for something to have the freedoms and opportunities that we get. And when you are living with somebody that English is not his first language, and I watched him, he spoke English as well as you and I when I first met him, but he couldn't write it the way that you should write it. So struggling to master that, to go on to get a Ph.D. and a second master's degree, and not only attain those, to be to win tons of accolades for his writing and to be nationally published and things like that was a huge thing. We take all that for granted. And looking at and talking to him and living it through his eyes gave me a renewed perspective about the things that we do, like even within the military. You know, the national anthem playing at 5 o'clock, and everybody's like, "Let me not go outside because I'm gonna have to stop," or the discipline within the military, or just the true patriotism. And I always say, if you don't know why you're in the military, get out. We don't need you. And that's
Dang.
horrible to say. But if your values don't align with the military, why are you in? What are you standing for? And
Right.
it's more than a paycheck. It is more because you don't, even if you don't lose the way I lost, you give up time with your family. You know that at any given time, you could go somewhere really crappy. You know that you have to maintain certain physical standards. You have to, at this point, it becomes much harder to attain rank, no matter if you're enlisted or an officer. You know, there's so many blocks you have to fill. It's about the whole person. And if you're not into that, get out and do something else.
It's definitely you definitely have to appreciate it and love it to do it justice, to serve the way that it was the job was created. You know what I mean? And that's why I fear the day I take my uniform off, because I've always felt this deep sense of purpose. My dad, he, you know, similar to your husband, my dad was in 26 years, 16 years enlisted, 10 years as an officer, you know, very similar. And he came from West Virginia, you know, from nothing, you know, and so he's always been my inspiration. And so every time I put the uniform on, I think of him. I think of his legacy and how proud of him I was before I joined, and the pride that I feel now that I get to do that. So yeah, I'm right there with you. It takes that extra heart, you know, it really does. So I want to know a little bit. I know we talked about topics that we're going to get into, but I was hoping, you know, if there's anyone that's going to listen to this out there who's not familiar with your story and your background. And for those listening, I'm familiar a little bit with it because I actually was at Whiteman the same time as Linda, and I would, you know, we shared the same building occasionally, and I'd hear her giving her talks to the airmen, but I'd always stop and listen, you know, because the bathrooms were back where you guys were briefing, and we'd always try to not interrupt you and bust through the doors. But anytime I would stop back there, I would stop and just sit and listen for a little bit. And I'd see you bring a service dog in. I would see you running incredibly long distances. I was
Yes.
training for a half marathon at one point, which I did participate in, the Whiteman one. And when
Yeah,
you're
I can
out
tell you.
running, you'll see other runners constantly. You'll see the same people constantly that are training just like you, and you start to like recognize them and expect to see them. And I'd always see you and a white-haired gentleman running together.
Actually, the guy I'm going to marry in July
Oh, congratulations!
from Whiteman. Go figure. But we're
Right.
moving to Colorado.
Oh, nice. Colorado is beautiful. But there was always like an aura about you. Like I could just tell there was just something. I just knew you had a story. I could hear it when you tell the story. I could see it in your eyes, and when just the way you carry yourself, it was just it stands out. I can't really put my finger on it. You just stand out. People kind of gravitate towards you and want to listen to you and want to hear what you have to say, which is what led you here to this podcast. So thank you so much for doing this. So Linda, I was hoping you could take it back for us on how you met Phil and just your story and your journey with him and his legacy.
So I was a single mom living in Mountain Home Air Force Base, and I was working to get into medical school. The Army was going to put me through medical school, and I was the manager of the Mountain Home Air Force Base swimming pool. And this young airman came walking in an ugly blue hammock swimming suit. And for the record, that's not helpful. and it's not attractive on anybody.
Hey, it worked, apparently.
No, not really. He came strutting in, and I was like, ew. And I thought he was flirting with all of my friends at the pool. And so I basically cold shouldered him. Because my goal was not to date at that point. My goal was to get out of there and go to medical school. He asked me out 19 times before I finally said yes. We
Wow.
became we became friends during that 19 times. I coached Special Olympics. He came alongside of me and coached Special Olympics. We did some volunteer work together. We started working out together. And it became a joke. It wasn't, I really didn't think he was serious about asking me out until the 19th. After 19 times, he said, I've asked you out 19 times. This is the 20th. If you say no, I'm not going to ask you out again. I said yes. And 4 months later, we eloped.
Oh my gosh, that escalated quickly.
Yes, it did. Chocolate love.
Did he have like a really cool accent?
No, he did not, but he could turn it on, and that was really cool. It was really funny. So
Yeah.
he chased me all over the house using lots of accents.
And he could speak Spanish. Is that what he would speak from Venezuela?
Yes, but French was his first language. And
No
then,
way. French?
yes, because
Wow.
his
No wonder
father,
this guy's so smart. He's got all these languages bouncing off in his head. For to have that much information in your head that young, that could only help you, growing up, I feel like.
it could. So his dad was French, and they left after World War II from France to Venezuela, which was an up and coming country when Europe was in chaos. And that's how his family ended up in Venezuela. And so he was in Venezuela and French at home, Spanish in school. Came to the States at 12, knowing 2 words of English, USA for USA and Sumatimas for sometimes. And when I met him at barely 21, he had just turned 21, he spoke English as well as you and I. And you would never have known he wasn't from America.
He's like a genius.
He really was. And he picked languages up really fast. And I never knew how he picked up languages until right before he went to Afghanistan, because he got the tapes and he would listen to one word over and over again until he could say it exactly like the tape said it.
He's focused on the inflection, the accent. He wanted to sound like they
Native.
sound.
Yeah.
Not just say it, but sound like they sound.
Exactly. And he was a born mimic. So he could have picked up the way that you talk, the way I talk. And I think that played into his ability to pick up foreign languages and be able to run with it.
I feel like you just understand people better too, because like you've lived in multiple countries too. I lived in Okinawa, and I love the people. I love the language, and I surprisingly picked up on the language. Like when I was immersed in it, I picked up on it. I love to mimic the accent. I love to surprise them with what I could say.
No, you're good. I am not. Europe was easier for me than Japan.
They always got such a kick out of me speaking Japanese. And to this day, I have dreams of speaking in that language, but it allowed me to, it just opens up your mind to how they view things, how they describe things, the words that they value and really hone in on. Like they always ask, are you okay? Daijoubu, daijoubu ne? They're always asking about your well-being. It just really opened my perspective, learning that language. And so I could only imagine learning 3 languages. He'd have to have a really good insight on people in general.
And he could speak and converse in multiple languages, not just 3.
Oh, wow.
And so before he left to deploy, he picked up Farsi and Dari because he wanted to be able to speak to the local nationals. We have Portuguese daughter-in-laws, and so he worked in Portuguese to be able to talk to Portuguese daughter-in-laws. He deployed to Italy, so then he picked up, it's very similar to Spanish, but it's not Spanish. But he would speak all the time to pick up the Italian versus just the Spanish with it. And so then he was able to converse more than I could converse in German. So, I mean, he just was picking up languages right and left. And I can't do that. I can ask how much things cost, how to get to the bathroom, say, excuse me, thank you, do some counting. And in Japan, it's just holding up fingers. I can say thank you and a few things like that, but it's different. The Asian language versus the European languages.
Oh yeah, the whole structure of the sentence is different. So Phil finally got you on the 19th time. And then how many months? You said 4 months?
4 months later, we eloped.
4 months later, y'all are married. Then what?
And the Air Force, by the way, tells you not to do that. He was 21.
Right.
And then we basically, we had 2 more children together. He was the only father that my 3 knew because their other father opted not to be in their life. And so Phil was dad. And he never referred to my 3 children by previous marriage as step anything, nor did they refer to him as step anything. The siblings were all just my brother and my sister. And that speaks really highly of him, because it must have been really hard to be 21 and have 3 children, 3, 4, and 5.
Definitely.
And he was fully invested in them. He, at that time, he was a senior airman, definitely had that rank, and he made senior airman, then he had the
Buck
stripe.
sergeant?
Yeah, the sergeant.
Buck
Remember
sergeant,
the old
right?
rank, the buck sergeant, yep.
Yeah.
He made rank the first time he tested for every single rank.
Yep, I know guys like that too, and I'm just like, that ain't me, but hey, hats off to you. I don't know how you do it, but I'm impressed.
Because he did nothing for himself.
Right.
It was full investment in work and full investment in his family. And then when the rest of us would be throttling it back, and all those times that he was TDY, the only thing he did was work and study. In the 6 months that
he's incredibly disciplined.
Very disciplined. And I would say that was a character, and I had never even thought about it, but I would say of all the characteristics that describe Phil, he was very, very disciplined on every aspect of his life. His family meant everything to him. And then behind his family, it was the Air Force.
Which is like his second family.
It was. And he didn't grow up in a really nice home. So for him, the stability that the military offered and the stability that I offered, and, in a sick way, when you grow up in a really chaotic, awful home where really he probably should have been taken away from his family. What I will say is he told me all the time, I gave him the stability he never had in his life. And he wouldn't have achieved what he achieved in the military if I hadn't been alongside of him. And so sometimes I think spouses lose sight of the role that they can have in supporting and being, and I don't say a cheerleader, but at least understanding the commitments and the time and the reasons, and sometimes standing out of the way. I didn't put pressure on him to make rank. I didn't put pressure on him. I didn't like him going TDY all that often, but you don't have choices. The first month is the hardest, and then you sort of get in a routine. Reintegration is always a bear because you have that incredible high, and then you have the, wait, now he's home. We haven't talked to each other in 6 months,
Yeah.
Well,
and then also, like, you've came up with your new norm, your new routine. And then so when he's back, it is different. It's hard to figure out, like, well, where do I fit in on this? Like, you've been doing it on your own and you've been doing great. How do I, it is that is tougher than people realize, that reintegration.
Did you know that more spouses report being clinically depressed 6 months after the husband comes home than while they're deployed? And that's exactly why.
Wow. I've never heard of that, but that is eye-opening.
And that's where I think that the military needs to do more.
That's a good point. That's why you're here.
That's exactly why I'm here. And I will tell you, back in the old days, we didn't have, internet like this. We did everything old-fashioned letters, or when he was in South America doing the drug wars, the radio, over. And that's horrible.
It is. Wow. Yeah, that's very old school. I was just talking about letters last week with Kaylee Brislin, who writes trainees and basic training letters of encouragement. And it did have me reflecting back on like, that was the first time in my life where I solely relied on letters, cause you're not allowed to use your phone or anything like that. Um, and wow, you have to wait weeks, a week to 2 weeks to get a response back. And you're thinking about that person and what they're going to say and wondering what they're doing. It's so much different, back then than it is today. Okay. So Phil, awesome guy, super intelligent, getting after it. Y'all are rocking and rolling. How many kids did y'all end up having in your family?
5. So we had at one point, he was a staff sergeant select with 5 children. And I was staying at home and we didn't believe in any federal handouts. So wrap your arm around this. I still cannot eat rice and beans. I can't.
Oh my
I don't
gosh.
care what restaurant serves it. I can't eat it.
Because you had to resort to that to save money at some point, right?
To survive.
To survive, literally. Holy cow. Linda.
Going to Europe helped because you do get, overseas time.
Right. And like there are a lot like taxes and things like life's just easier now with kids, but like in the military especially. But I've heard horror stories of, back in the day having a lot of kids and how it was so much harder then, so much harder financially. So wow, y'all had a lot going on really, really quickly. I'm a master sergeant and I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. Like, and I feel like, man, I can't, this is hard. Whoa. And then I hear that and I'm like, okay, staff sergeant with 5 kids. Maybe I shouldn't complain so much.
Well, I think what it did allow is it allowed us to invest in our family. So instead of sitting around and watching television because we couldn't afford cable or anything else, we went outside to the parks. We would go on hikes. We would go on picnics. We would, back in the old days, you'd rent a videotape, a kid's videotape, and you'd watch it 3 times and then you'd return it,
Right.
You found cheap fun. And we spent tons of time together as a family connecting. And I think that was huge because then when he was deployed, we would spend time every day writing to him or doing pictures, when the kids were younger and sending those. And we were invested in our family. And so there's a beauty in that. We didn't have kids that were hooked on a cell phone or in front of a television or a computer. We were together as a family and we read a lot. We went to the library a ton.
Wow. So they're probably very intelligent, from all that reading at a young age. And then on top of that,
they're smarter than me.
And then on top of that, that quality family time is irreplaceable. I mean, there's really nothing else like it. And I do find, I do a podcast and I'm heavily involved on social media. And then my wife will kind of be like, hey, you need to put that away. It's really easy to get immersed in it. I mean, we're still kind of like cavemen that just figured out fire, and not too much longer in the future, we have all this stuff and our brain just hooks its teeth into us. And it's tough to let go of that. But I've seen the difference between me and my family when we're all watching TV constantly versus we're at the beach having the time of our life. You know what I mean? So like it kind of warms my heart to hear that upbringing for your kiddos, because I know as a father, how special that must have been.
When you don't grow up that way, and Phil did not grow up that way, it became so for instance, when we were PCSing to Hill Air Force Base, I read the entire Little House on the Prairie series to my youngest 2, and my older kids had already read them. And then we intentionally chose our driving route to go through DeSmet, South Dakota. You don't go through DeSmet, South Dakota when you fly into the East Coast and drive to Hill Air Force Base. And then we went to Laura Ingalls Wilder's homestead, and we spent the day touring and doing different things on her homestead. And so we did a lot with reading books and then going places, as many as we could. The one upside about Phil being deployed all the time when we got to Europe, and we spent 10 years in Europe, was oftentimes he went to southern France. And so he made money. And since he wouldn't spend money when he was deployed, didn't eat out, he was crazy. He would take canned goods and he would eat canned goods. Um,
Jeez. The
and
most
when
disciplined man of all time.
he really is, and then he'd come home and we'd be able to go on a vacation, or we would fly to South France, and spend a month with him. We'd put all the kids in the room in sleeping bags, and we would make it a vacation. And so we did a lot of that, and it worked for our family.
Wow, that's beautiful. I know your kiddos are probably doing big things. It sounds like with a upbringing like that.
They really are. I have 4 kids serving out of 5.
You have 4 what?
4 children serving in the military.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I did read that on your bio. 4 in the military. How many are in the Air Force?
3.
3. What's the lone wolf? What did that person pick?
Army.
Oh, snap. That's hardcore.
Yeah. Well, he's medically retired at this point, but you know what? It is hardcore, and his nickname was Psycho Josh.
Oh my God. Can I steal that? My name's Josh. Can I be Psycho Josh part 2?
Psycho Josh part 2.
Just gonna start introducing myself as Psycho Josh and just see what people say. And I'll say, Linda told me I could do it.
That's right. It's Linda's suggestion.
Right.
Phil was an Air Force Academy professor. And as an Air Force Academy professor, he was incredibly popular and incredibly good at what he did, because he was so valuable because he knew multiple languages. And the Air Force decided to put him through a Ph.D. program. So during his Ph.D. program, he not only got a Ph.D., he got a second master's, and he was an honor student at DU. He substitute taught every single day in the school system where I was, and he coached right alongside of me. So all the kids knew him in my school district. They loved Mr. A. 5 days after he finished his PhD, he deployed to Afghanistan. He did it as a volunteer, and he did it as a volunteer for this reason. He said, how can I mentor cadets and my own children if I've never been? He also said that if this was happening in our country and you and Emily were at risk just because of your being girls, wouldn't you want somebody to come in and help educate and help do the things to help change the culture? He was not a combatant in any sense of the word. He was, let's change cultures, let's change people through coming in and showing compassion and empathy, working alongside of them, and educating just by kindness. And so when he got to Afghanistan, he was in the role of a trainer and an advisor. And he was actually a comm officer by training, but he'd only worked in that for 2 years before he became an Air Force Academy professor. But he was over there in that role as a comm person, but he was working with his languages also. And he was supposed to go to a place called Shindad, got diverted en route because of his languages to a place called Kandahar. And because I'm geographically stupid, I didn't realize that Kandahar serviced the Kabul airport. And he ate lunch often with a gentleman that had been in the Afghan military for almost as long as Phil. He'd been in 24 to Phil's 26 years, and he knew multiple languages. And so they would sit and they would practice their languages together. They taught. So this guy knew all about Phil's family. He knew, about Phil's story. Phil knew about his story, and Phil and I talked about it. And Phil didn't feel any sense of danger. And I didn't feel any danger. I felt more danger when Phil was doing the drug wars than I did when he went over to Afghanistan, because it sounds safe. Advisor, you're working with NATO troops. You are not over there. In America, you'd be in your blue uniform doing this. He was over there just working. And to me, it was an inconvenience. It wasn't a year-long deployment. The same year that your kids are out of the house is kind of stinky. And so that's what I looked at it as, was an inconvenience with the time change and all of the other things that went with it. The hours that rotate around when you're deployed. It was hard to maintain a regular talking schedule like we like to, because I was a teacher, so I didn't have the flexibility to take calls either. And on the 27th of April of 2011, I went to work and I fired up my computer at work at 6:30 in the morning. And the ticker tape through MSN was 6 confirmed dead at the Kabul airport shooting. And I thought to myself, thank God Phil's not there, because I didn't know, the geography. And I was so relieved that I went next door and told my music teacher that. And I had never voiced that before. I went about my day. Doing everything that you do as a teacher. And then at 1:32 in the afternoon, the principal and the school counselor came down to my gym. And I had over 30 first graders in my gym. And the principal said, Linda, I need for you to come with me. And I'm thinking I'm losing my job. It was a day that my school district had basically declared bankruptcy. And I had volunteered to be the teacher to be let go, because I knew that when Phil came home from his deployment, that we were going to go somewhere for 4 years before we came back to the Air Force Academy to finish out his career. So it made logical sense that I'd be the one to lose my job versus somebody else. So I volunteered. And that's the thing about a body slam, is you think you might know what those body slams are going to be, but you really don't know. One day you wake up, everything's normal, and then you get smacked in the face with something. And so I'm following the principal up the school hallway, and I see all the media trucks outside. And I think, crap, I have to give an interview about losing my job and not say that I was a volunteer to do this. I need to be gracious. I need to formulate how I'm going to respond to the questions. Hit the office, and all the naughty kids are running out of the office, and the phones are ringing, and everybody's staring at me. And I'm still thinking, crap, everybody knows except for me, I'm losing my job. And yes, the media knew before I knew. In the Air Force world, we don't have loss like other branches, so we're not good at it. And things have changed based on my story and the things that went wrong. And I will say this, nobody intentionally did this because I'm Linda Ambard. They did it just their own reactions, their own grief, their own shock over this happening to an Air Force Academy professor. But if it can go that wrong at the Air Force Academy, it can go that wrong anywhere in the Air Force. But a general went on television at 10:30 in the morning and said, today we lost one of our own. That was all it took for the media to figure out who it was and where I was, where my kids were, and you could go on. And when I was being notified, they told me my kids had already been notified. So my kids were finding out on Facebook. They were finding out by overhearing a secondary friend talking about it. I could just go on, and it put a whole new layer of trauma into something that was already traumatic. And I will say, I wasn't in resiliency then. I didn't teach resiliency. I was teaching PE. I taught elementary PE and high school English. But the very first thing that happened to me was I dropped to my knees keening. I was so shocked, and I looked around at who's making that horrible noise, not realizing it was me. But as I dropped to my knees, one thought crossed my mind: how can I claim to have faith if in my darkest hour I turn from my faith? And yes, my spiritual resiliency does include a church faith, but not everybody's does. That's also why you do what you do, which became an important part of my positive, post-traumatic growth. I am a better person now than I was even before Phil died. And some of that came with the choices. When you have no choices, you can still, there's a little bit of control in being able to make choices. And so, and what do I mean by that? And I may be getting ahead of myself. I didn't feel like lacing up my running shoes. But when I got to Dover, somebody had done some research and said, Linda, you don't feel like running today. But if you go out and run, you'll be able to deal with what comes next a little bit better. You may not be able to run, maybe you just walk. And so I put on my running shoes, and in the 10 miles that I ran, I was able to get control enough of my feelings to make decisions about how I wanted Phil's funeral to look, his burial, being able to face the media and what I wanted to say to the media, because I didn't want the media to know me, the out of control grief. I wanted it to stand for something, because Phil stood for a whole lot more than just a uniform. He was more than the military person he was. He was a husband and father, a mentor, a friend. And if I had been totally out of control when it came to media or the way I was responding to the things that were going wrong, I was dishonoring him. And I didn't want to do that.
Well, that's a lot to be going through your mind. And me having the honor guard background, you know, I'm familiar with how fast things escalate. The decisions that you have to make, the questions you're being asked, your brain hasn't even grasped the reality. You haven't even thought about your future. And suddenly you're being asked all these questions on the funeral, and you know, how's the benefits going to work, and the insurance, and there's this whole process that goes along with it that needs to happen, you know, right away. And that's very, very tough. And my boss, his name's Captain Cunningham, or Major Cunningham now. He works at the Pentagon. He was my boss. He was in charge of mortuary affairs, and he would be the one, when we had an active duty member pass, that would go meet the family in service dress blues, spend time with them, answer their questions. And I always really, really admired him for taking that on, because he's done it a bunch of times, sadly. But you know, it was helpful for me because I was doing the funerals, and a few of the active duties really got to me, because it's just such a raw moment in that person's life that you're a part of in that ceremony. But I really admired my boss because he was a part of it too, and he understood. So Linda, you know, I know it's been years, and you've told the story to a lot of people and inspired a lot of people, but I still want to tell you I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
And I still want to tell you that we will never forget Major Phil Ambard. Never. He will be forever remembered in some fashion for the incredible life he lived, the example that he set. And not only that, but he's living through you. He's living through your kids. Look at your kids. They're in the service. Look at you helping people as the community support counselor. Is that what CSC is?
Community support coordinator.
Community support coordinator, where your job is taking care of families. And so the legacy lives on. So when you were talking about Phil in the Middle East, you mentioned that he met this friend that almost a peer from the other side, right? On the other military. Is that the person?
He wore a uniform, and he was somebody Phil should have been able to trust. And he assassinated him. Not only did he assassinate him, I will tell you the hardest thing about Phil's story is he knew his assassin, and he had time to know what was happening, because we lost 9 that day. And it was not a segregated room. There were over 20 Afghan soldiers in that room, and 8 of our people. And the thing about it is, not one of those people in our NATO uniform, Afghan military uniform, did anything to respond to what was happening in that room. Our people didn't sit around and say, here I am, it's a crowded room. They didn't sit around saying, here I am, shoot me next. So you have to wonder what else happened in the room that day. And one of the big travesties, and things are changing in our Air Force, and I'm really, really proud of our Air Force, in large part because of the events of that day and the advocacy and speaking I've done on this. And not just me, other people, but it's been a large part of my way forward. But the Air Force wanted to give me, I always said, what version of the fairy tale do you want to tell me today? You know, you don't have the answers. You don't know what happened today. And nobody on the other side is talking. And now imagine if you are somebody that was there stationed with the 9 that lost their life, and you have to go to work now with those people. And you don't, It put a lot
That's
of
scary.
fear, and put a lot of fear in there. Plus, we had, they had rules about the way your weapons could be carried, and that, like amber, where the clip isn't in it and things like that. Some of those things where it was just crazy. What kills me is Phil New's assassin. He was one of the last to die in the room. And he was the one that was able to get his gun out, but not able to get it off because of doing this. And he was shot more times than people could count. And, and he wasn't shot to kill first, and when you have a military person that comes, that's the investigator, and says, well, you know what, they froze. That's what I heard first. They froze. Or he was in shock. It couldn't have hurt. And I said, have you ever had children? 5 to 7 minutes of being in terrible pain, when you're in childbirth seems like hours. I don't care if it was 1 minute. Don't give me that crap. Nobody wants to hear that. So you hear, even from the trusted agency, which is the Air Force, you're hearing stories that are not adding up, and you're hearing things that are not helpful. Then you have family members that don't know what to say, so they don't say anything. And in military loss, it becomes, you lose even more than that. So you lose as a spouse. People don't know what to say, so they don't say anything at all. You become the visible reminder of what could happen to their spouse. And my third and favorite one is, people think that maybe your moral compass might change because you're suddenly single. So you might hit on, their spouses. The military tells you you have 1 year to move. Well, that's waiverable up to 3 years, but how would a spouse know to ask that? Most military people don't know that. My bank accounts got frozen. My bank accounts got frozen because we had USAA. We did everything online. We had one username, one password, and you could have the same password, but you need 2 usernames. Because even though Colorado's a no probate state and we had an active will, because Phil set up the account, everything froze. So the death gratuity, my paycheck, everything was frozen. I had $40 in my purse for 3.5 weeks. I couldn't use any of my credit cards because you have to wait for the form 1300 to come from overseas. So there are practical things that hadn't been done before deployment. There were practical things that were happening afterwards so the Air Force dropped me off in an empty house with the media right outside of my house with nobody there to help me filter or to go through that. They did a great job in the funeral, an outstanding job in the funeral. And it couldn't even ask for more. I mean, more than I would have known to ask for. But when it came to like driving to the airport, they were not so good at that. And when you're in that state, you don't have the ability to make good decisions, choices. You're not sleeping, you're not eating, you're not safe. You're at risk for a medical crisis or suicide ideations, or God forbid, flipping out at the Air Force, that's a critical time frame. And so your listeners are listening, I would say showing up. Even if somebody doesn't want you there, showing up, bringing tissues and toilet paper and sitting, just saying, I'm gonna sit here, I'll help you dial your phone. That's a key component until you can do a warm handoff either to the airport, or to another loved one. And putting the right person in charge of being the family liaison person that walks alongside of you to help navigate all of those decisions. Because the person they gave me was in trouble in the military and he wasn't available. He only showed up when the 4 stars showed up, and didn't pick up his phone, didn't answer emails. That's not helpful. And so I lost my faith in the military 100% in the Air Force. And I took out my grief and anger towards the Air Force. And that was a really big, that was horrible to say. And I've forgiven, I have moved on, and I'm using the things that happened to me to create change for those people coming after me. How I have to look at it is they didn't do it on purpose. They didn't have the experience with death. They weren't doing it to get to me. I had to change my perspective. It was just, if you don't know, you may not consider some of these things. I lost my community. So while it doesn't sound like much, when you spend your whole adult life being military or a military spouse, where do you fit after that?
There's like this whole other side of grief to it.
There is. And so if I'd had children in the house, imagine this. We take families that have children and we tell them they have to move. The only stability a child may have at that time is their school and their schoolmates. And as a parent, how do you fix the hurts in your children when you can't fix them in yourself? And so that's where I never set out to be the voice of Air Force loss. I never set out to be Miss Resiliency. But what happened was people kept wanting me to talk about how I felt. I didn't want to talk about how I felt. That's not me at all. The other neat little thing about becoming a military widow is immediately you go from being a dependent wife, which I hate that term, but with your little ID card, to being deceased beneficiary. What that means is you're lower than the retiree. So imagine trying to get health care. You can't go see mental health. You're not supposed to talk to the chaplain anymore. You can't talk to MPLACs. And the problem is, yes, they would refer me off base. I wanted somebody internal that knew what it was like to wear a uniform, because military loss is not like regular loss. There's all sorts of layers to it, because you feel like you've lost your country. You feel like you've lost your society and your family. You feel like you've lost your way. And where do I want to live? I don't know. I haven't lived in Boise, Idaho since 1979. So you want me to go where? I'm too old to go live with my mama, too young to go live with my kids. You want me to stay in Colorado Springs? I don't want to live in Colorado Springs. And actually, what's weird is that's where I'm retiring and where I want to be now. But I didn't know that at the time. I wasn't prepared to make these decisions. I had to leave the job I loved because it was hurting my kids in school. My kids all know who Mr. A was. And my first day back at work, a little first grader came in and, well, none of the adults knew what to say to me. They weren't talking to me. This little first grader puts his hand in mine and says, "Mrs. A, how did Mr. A die?" I'm thinking, crap, how do I answer that? And he looks at me and says, "Well, Mr. A got shotted or stabbed. Mr. A's in the Air Force, so he probably got shotted. I hope my daddy doesn't get shotted." And that was the day I realized I had to leave the job I really loved, the school I really loved, and move on so that they could heal and I could heal. And that's a big responsibility when you're thinking as a widow, what's best for me. And that's part of trauma, is sometimes trusting yourself. It's part of resiliency, because people always have ideas of how you're supposed to cope with things and do things. And while it was incredibly hard to make decisions, I was making them and I had to trust myself on them. So I ran away to Germany for 2 years to teach. When I got to Germany, at the time I had 26 friends on Facebook. And I started blogging about my journey because it helped me to be able to release those feelings. I never looked again at what I wrote, so I'm sure there were tons of typos in it and things like that. I just wrote, purged it, and left it. I posted on Facebook so that my family would know how I was feeling. 5 kids, mom, a couple aunts, a couple of school friends, and things like that. People kept forwarding it. And pretty soon somebody said to me, "Hey, I got a friend who's a publisher, would like to publish this, your series of blogs." Well, I didn't want to make money off of Phil's death, so I started looking for an organization to donate the proceeds to. You're never going to make a lot of money, by the way, on a book about military loss. So don't think I made a ton of money, but found Tragedy Assistance Program. And they provide tons of resources for not just military, surviving spouses, kids, moms, dads, brothers, sisters, but to battle buddies that are with people that have lost another military member that they were close to. They do seminars, and they do a national seminar in Washington, D.C. on Memorial Day weekend. They do all sorts of things. And I bring that up because I accidentally found a positive way to honor Phil. So I took my book proceeds, donated it to TAPS through running events. So I started running with the TAP singlet on, which looks like a little bit like an American flag. And I started telling Phil's story at running races. And I started honoring Phil through the steps that I covered. And this, and in the course of doing that, the military started listening and hearing some of these things. And they didn't respond right away or whatnot. They started following some of my blogs, and I didn't even know that they were doing that. But then more and more people kept reaching out to me and saying, hey, can you talk about this? Can you do this? And I said yes every single time. I showed up and said yes, because I said somebody needs to be talking about it. And in the Air Force world, we're not. People assume that this is a country club branch of the military. We go to TDY to Holiday Inns and, we don't get shot. But that's not true. If you can be an Air Force Academy professor and get shot, there is nobody that's exempt, from this. And so I started speaking, I started writing. About 2 years in, a general said to me, have you ever thought about working federal service? And I said, well, I was federal service for a lot of years before I left to teach. And he said, would you like to come back? And so he helped me get a job running the youth programs at Hanscom Air Force Base. And while I was there, I'm doing all the speaking and writing. They said, would you like to be a master resiliency trainer? It was a brand new program. And I said, yes. I went to this training and it clicked. I signed up for a 4th master's degree while I was in this program called Military Resiliency Counseling out of Liberty University. And I started studying positive trauma growth. That's where I've been published nationally, is on positive trauma growth, about those choices. And while the military has this resiliency program, it was a start, but there's a lot missing in our resiliency program. We like to do death by PowerPoint. And the problem is people are tired. You need to learn the skills. That's what you have FTAC for and OTS for. But then why does this matter? We need to reinvigorate the skills and make them personable to people. So for instance, with gratitude is the most basic of all the resiliency skills. When you are feeling crappy and terrible, it's hard to find things to be thankful for. So if I ask you today, what are you thankful for, Josh?
Oh, wow. Putting me on the spot. I would say I'm thankful for my family. I'm thankful for where I got to in my life, because I had very low expectations for myself, kind of gave up a few times. So I'm thankful for the opportunity to be here. And I'm thankful for anyone that's willing to join me on this journey called life. And gratitude has pretty much changed my life. I never was a grateful person. I didn't see it that way until I started sharing that love with other people, highlighting them, making their family proud of them. And when I started doing that and pausing and really, sharing that love, giving people that love, it changed my life.
All right. So what you just did was, in a nutshell, demonstrated why gratitude is important. If you're having a hard time being grateful or finding something to be grateful for, you're a suicide risk. Because why are you getting up in the morning? What do you have to look forward to? So
and I've been there. I've been in that position where I had nothing to except the fear of getting in trouble to get me up. I've been there.
That's not enough.
Just hanging by a thread and not even realizing it.
So gratitude is the most basic of all the skills. And we're not telling people why that's important. So when the hits start coming, or when the really big body slam happens, and we haven't practiced that, and we're not fighting for it, because you do have to fight for it when you're on your knees. It's not like when things are going great, it's easy to find a whole bunch of things to be kind of thankful for. But there are periods in life when it's incredibly difficult to find something to be thankful for, or even in a relationship. If you're in a relationship and your relationship is floundering, it's easy to look at all the things that are going poorly versus at what's going right. So if you practice this every day for a month and you find one thing that you're thankful for the individual, at the end of the month, it may not change the situation with that individual, but it will change it will make your perspective a little more balanced. That's why learning gratitude is important. So in the military world, we also tend to think of, we're really strong at social resiliency because we could go anywhere in the world and connect with people. Oh, weren't you at Whiteman? Oh, hey, you were in that job? Yeah, I know that job. Or, I was at Kadena, we can connect on any level within 5 minutes of being on any base. The problem is this, and this is what happened even as a widow. One day you walk through the door in a military uniform, you know exactly who you are. It doesn't matter what your rank is. You know your value, your job, you have a community. The next day you retire, where do I fit? I may or may not be able to find a job that corresponds with military service. I might go home thinking the home is where I want to live because every time I go visit, all my friends are there. But when I retire, it's different because I haven't lived there. They all have routines. Those friendships are based on, I would say, vacation friendships versus on real life friendships. Health problems start cropping up in your 40s and 50s. Oftentimes, kids leave the house. You have financial issues, and marriages start to flounder. And so something that you may not have thought about starts to become your go-to strategy, which is often suicide. So when we talk about in the military, the young people and suicide, we're not talking about the 50 plus veteran. And how many 50 plus veterans, our number one homeless population are veterans. And I'm not saying gratitude fixes everything, but it is a basic step, and it's a basic thing to start looking at before the hits start coming. Because it's not a matter of if, but when we all have some type of body slam. Well, mine looks different from yours. We've all had them. And sometimes it's not a big one, and sometimes it's a whole bunch of little ones. And so my whole life changed with becoming a widow. So going back to my story, and I know I digressed a little bit, but throwing.
No, you're saying a lot. You're dropping a lot of knowledge.
I master's degree in military resiliency counseling, and I started filling in the blanks between the way that the Air Force does resiliency and the actual research and different pockets of things that go with it. So for instance, the Air Force would never tell you, but humor is part of spiritual resiliency because humor produces optimism. Optimism produces hope.
Oh, wow.
And we don't talk.
Yeah. Did you know did I tell you I'm an MRT?
No, I did not know that.
Yes, I am one. I've been one for like a year and a half now.
Good. You're the perfect person for it. So you're learning some things here. Music actually falls under spiritual resiliency. And the reason why is oftentimes people want you to talk about how you feel. You may not be able to say it. So if you got a hold of my iPod, I'd be embarrassed. It's got patriotic music, top 40 music, classical music, oldies, church music, but there's a folder in there, and it's a folder of music with a whole bunch of bad words. And you don't always say what you think. We all behave oftentimes the way that we think people should expect us to behave. But by listening to music, I can feel the way that I'm feeling right then. It's kind of a mindful, way of listening to music. And I can take that and go running, listen to my bad words, and come back and be done having my little snippet.
Yeah, the music plus the running sometimes just opens up your emotions. Like, I don't think I've ever even told anyone this before, but like, I lost my stepmom, and there's certain times when my run my brain does a really good job at like tucking those things away. I think everyone's. Our brains are hardwired to be like, well, let's not think about that. Let's just hide that back here. But there's something about the run and the music, depending on the mood I'm in and how I'm feeling on that run, where suddenly that trauma just like comes to the surface. And I find myself being like emotional on the run. Like I'll have to like go off in the woods somewhere and just kind of like get it out of my system. When normally I couldn't reach that emotion. I couldn't pull that out. But the music and the running, it allows me to release it from time to time.
And so where I really turned the corner was an event that you wouldn't think would make you turn the corner. I was running the Boston Marathon 2 years after Phil was killed. I had finished 26 miles. I was running in April. I was honoring Phil and the life that he had. I could see the finish line. I was one stoplight from the finish line. I was chasing down my finish line. The first bomb went off. As I'm processing what that bomb is, the guy next to me says, "Are they doing cannons at the finish line?" And I'm thinking to myself, they don't do cannons at marathons, and certainly not for 4-hour marathoners. And as I'm thinking about the second bomb went off, and I fled for my life, I ran, and I can't remember anything, but I found myself cowering under a table in a Dunkin' Donuts store, about a half a mile from the finish line. And I was terrified. And all of the nightmares and all of the sights and smells and all of those things meshed with Phil's death. And it was a really dark place. But I got angry. And I said, I cannot let terrorism take any more from me. I simply can't. They've already taken, terrorism has already taken Phil. And terrorism seeks to destroy lives, maim human spirit. And in that moment of deciding to fight to thrive versus just survive, and that's a key thing. So initially in your storm, you're breathing through it 1 second at a time, 1 minute at a time, 1 hour, 1 mile, 1 marathon at a time. A marathon is 26.2 miles. I've done 208 of them, and there's never one of them I haven't wanted to quit. I know it's going to hurt more tomorrow and more the next day. But I also know that if I look only at the step in front of me, I can get there. I might get lost. I might fall down. I might need to talk to a friend. I might need to take a rest, but I can get to the finish line or to a place where I know I can do it. And so the Boston bombing put me at that place. Up until that point with Phil's death, the first year I was largely really numb. The second year was a lot harder than the first year because I knew that forever was a long time then. And I was trying to figure out everything. And people had all sorts of ideas of how I should be doing it. And it didn't mesh or in line with the way I thought I should be grieving or the way I wanted to go forward. And so with the Boston bombing, I basically started tagging thrive versus just survive. I cannot live in fear anymore. I've got to figure out a way to be happy again. And happiness is a choice. And it's not something that you can force, but it is something that you can work towards, you can make decisions for. And by the way, I have low battery.
I'm getting there too. I'm at 17% on mine, but my computer uses my mic and I use my cell phone as a camera, so because it's HD. The downside is I don't have a battery charging. So, but Linda, what I want to ask you though about the Boston bombing, when it clicked to you, like, hell no, I'm tired of living like this. I can't live my life in fear. You got your husband on your mind. You're living for your husband. You want to make him proud, right? You know what he would appreciate. You know the type of
stand for more.
Yes. That goes through your mind. It fuels you. It fires you up to say, no more. I'm not living like this. Did it click in that moment, or did it click a day later? When did that hit you?
It clicked in that moment. I wrote a blog that went viral, like over 500,000 hits.
Wait, did you write it that day?
I did.
Holy cow. And
it was basically, I'm not letting terrorism take any more from me.
And that was it.
That was it.
There was a new Linda that day.
There was a new Linda that day. And so everything I've done since that time is to look for ways to live beyond my fears. And one of the ways I've done that is I went back and ran my 100th marathon, taking back my Boston Marathon finish line. And I was terrified. Every time I hit the Boston finish line area, I know it. My body takes over. All those embedded memories come back. It was supposed to be I did the Great Wall of China as my first continent that I hadn't lived there, something totally outside of my comfort zone. but I'm running a marathon on all 7 continents, carrying a full American flag across the finish line. And the reason why I'm doing that is I'm taking back every corner of my world from living in fear. And it's not taken any more from me. They may take my life, but they're not taking me. And that's
wow, Linda, you're a warrior.
But those are those choices that we all have. You can't change the cards you're dealt, but you can choose how you want to play them. And maybe it doesn't look like the way I'm choosing to play my cards, but I cannot live in fear anymore. And people don't understand. I have family members that don't understand, and it doesn't matter. It's not about their journey. It's about my journey and what works for me. And that trusting yourself, the choices that we don't talk about in resiliency, but there is an element of choice in resiliency, and we should be talking about it. And making, trusting yourself is the biggest part of it. And even more than that, I don't want to just survive. I want to thrive. And I was supposed to have done Antarctica in March, but they canceled it due to COVID this year. So I will be running Antarctica next year in March. And
people run in Antarctica?
Yes, I do.
And I will be running legal.
With my full American. Well, there's a 5-year waiting list. And you have to go on a certain boat and it's a certain way of doing it.
You're going to need an American flag parka out there. I don't know what that's got to be.
I want the whole red, white, blue outfit, but I don't have that all.
Right. Dang, Linda. What do you think, what would Phil say about you today? What would, you know him better than anyone.
I think he'd be shocked because I was so quiet and shy. But I think that he probably always knew I had it in me. But it was just, this is not who I was when Phil was killed. I'm a better version of the person I was. I don't let fear stop me. I live my values. Oftentimes we say our family is the most important thing, but we save our worst behaviors for our family or the leftovers. And I would say living my values, and more than that, being transparent and vulnerable. Because people are, especially within the military world, the longer we're in, the stronger our warrior ethos kicks in. We think we have to be strong or show that we're strong for those people coming after us. So we're less likely to get help the longer we're in. And our spouses are right there with us. And so by being vulnerable and talking about it and being real with it, being real with the intentional storytelling, it's opened up whole new avenues for our military families and our military people to talk about what they're going through. And I don't just tell the story to be the train wreck, but to talk about different resiliency skills. And when I do my briefings, oftentimes I have helping agencies come along with me, like mental health or family advocacy or MFLAC or chaplain, to talk about specific skills if you're going through stuff. And I think that's a key part of it. A lot of people can tell their stories. I want to do more than inspire and motivate. I want to educate. And I don't want to just be that, well, that was a great briefing. I want to be the reason why maybe people look at what works for them. There's a great book, I did not write it, but if people are really looking for things that make sense, it's called Super Survivors. And Super Survivors is about stories of people that have been through much worse than me, and the things that they did to overcome and to be better than they were. It's research-based. When I got that master's degree and I started studying positive trauma growth, the last third of the book has all the research studies. They just list them. And I went and looked up all the research studies. It's research-based, but it's easy read. It was actually in the bestseller list many years ago now. Outstanding book. And then after that, a book called Option B, but I think Super Survivors is the best one.
Well, I'm definitely writing those down. And I'm sure anyone listening is going to look those up as well. Hopefully they're on Audible with my young kids.
They are, and you can get them through
Okay.
Amazon.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. Audiobooks are the greatest thing that's ever happened. Once you've had kids and you just can't sit down and read a book. I mean, that's not going to work. But
and I do not get kickbacks, just for the record.
All right. That's great, Linda. Thank you I've never heard of those books. I've talked to a lot of people and books come up in almost every single talk that I've had, and I've never heard of those. So thank you so much for sharing that. And the last question I have for you, Linda, is out of all the people that you've helped, the lives you've touched, is there any story you'd like to share where you really feel like you had an impact on a certain individual? Is there any sort of success story from your career that you're most proud of?
So I still actively do a lot on my Facebook. And it's not one individual, but when I hear the words, because of you, I didn't give up. You gave me hope that someday things will be better. That fuels everything. Because again, I have friends that I have lost. I have family members that don't understand why I'm doing what I'm doing. I've had people tell me, if you keep doing that, you're never going to be able to get married again. I am getting married again. I'm getting remarried again this summer. And for a period of time, even my own kids didn't understand. And now they support me, they get me. My fiance does. I'm not doing this for me. I don't really care about the awards. I'm retiring on May 6th. But there are still families that are dealing with this. And if not military loss other ways, like through COVID or through car accidents or cancer. And when I hear those words, because of you, I didn't give up. You give me hope. That's why I do what I do.
That's beautiful, Linda. You're, when you tell your story, the one word that stuck with me was isolated. Yes. You didn't just lose Phil. Your friends were uncomfortable. Your family was uncomfortable. They didn't know how to approach you, and therefore a lot of them chose not to at all.
Yes.
Your military family, you're no longer an active duty spouse, right? You've lost that status. So the community's gone. You were in every sense of the word isolated.
And it's been a fight. It's been a fight, and it's still not easy all the time. I'm at Kadena Air Base. I don't have people outside of the base where I can communicate with them because I don't have the languages. People come with families, or they're much younger than me because the military is a young society, or they lead a lifestyle I don't lead. And grief is isolating, and it doesn't even have to be grief. It can be grief over losing a job, or it can be grief over what's going on in your life. But I would say in the last 10 years, that has been the hardest thing for me, is feeling like I don't fit anywhere.
I think you do fit in, Linda. I think we're better Air Force because of you, sharing your stories, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and what we need to face those hard truths. This is where we drop the ball. This is where we could do better. I mean, we're talking about human beings here. We're talking about their life. This is not something to take lightly. So I'm
give a shout out to one person. I give a shout out to one person.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. This is your show. Go for it.
Retired General Goldfein got it. And when he heard my story, he asked me to write to him about all the things that had happened. And he started the change. He started the change, and he stood up a survivor council, made me a senior advocate for it. He invested time, money, and effort into it. He got it on a big level. And the Air Force is changing. And while it certainly wasn't timely for me and for many families, and it's not perfect, we are changing.
That's beautiful, Linda. And when you help someone, they said because of you, you're helping yourself, right? That was you back then. And how good that would feel to get someone's love and care and guidance when you were going through it. And that's why it means so much to you to hear that, because you see yourself in them. And your husband would be damn proud of you, because you've taken his values, his work ethic, his pride, and you've put it into your own life and have taken it to a level that you didn't even know was possible.
You are spot on. His life changed me.
And so because of that, Major Phil Ambard still lives today in your heart, and he lives through you in your actions. So Linda, I just want to tell you thank you so much. I know it's a hard story to share no matter how many times, because your brain kind of has to go back to that moment to really capture the story, right? And so that's never an easy place to revisit. And so for that, I want to tell you thank you from the bottom of my heart for sharing that. I know so many people are going to be humbled and inspired by your journey and Phil's journey. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And so that's it, everyone. This was the hero's journey of Mrs. Linda Ambard. Take care.